How does God judge people? This question is actually more important to Christian doctrine than it might initially seem. Today I'd like to look at the opening of Joshua chapter 6 and take a look at how exactly it is that God judges people. This is Eric Slawick, the UWM pen guy, and this is the Bible commentary. As always, if you like what you're seeing, I'd ask that you hit like and subscribe in order to help the channel grow. Now, without further ado, let's get into the Word. So today we're going to begin our study of Joshua chapter 6, the first big battle to take the city of Jericho. So today we're going to look at verses 1 and 2, and let's start with verse 1. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. So there's a lot here. Obviously, in many ways, this is following up the events of chapters 3 through 5, and actually, honestly, chapters 1 through 5. And in some ways, it actually is following up the book of Numbers and Exodus. Remember what Rahab said, that the people of Jericho had heard the report of what the God of Israel had done to the Egyptians, and how the people of Israel had crossed the Red Sea. And then this was compounded, as I believe I looked into in a previous video, by the crossing of the Jordan River. There's a lot that led up to this moment. As is often the case in the providence of God, God builds up his judgments, his mercies, his works, little by little, but then all of a sudden it all explodes at once. So the commander of the Lord's armies had previously, just prior to this, told Joshua that the Lord, in the person of his commander, was going to be with Joshua and the people of Israel as they stormed the city of Jericho. Now, this storming was going to come by a means that was somewhat unexpected. This is an embodiment of the principle that Paul lays out in the book of Corinthians, which I'm sure we'll come back to repeatedly in the study of chapter 6, that God uses the foolish things of this world to overcome the wise, that the people of Jericho believed that by closing themselves in, they were building up their own position to such a degree that it could never be taken by this newcomer menace, the armies of Israel that just suddenly appeared at their doorstep and clearly had intentions of conquest. Now, it can easily be said that Jericho, from what apparently has been learned from archaeology and the general layout of the book of Joshua, the way that the other cities we'll see will later respond to the fall of Jericho, that this was the best defended city, and obviously it was on the highest alert. This is actually an illustration of another principle that parallels this principle from Paul in Corinthians, that God views his enemies and all their most effective, well-coordinated, refortified, generally powerful schemes as if though they were just grasshoppers hopping around with all this hyperactive energy, essentially accomplishing nothing against the overriding, all-powerful power of God. So that, as has been previously suggested, you had a compounding of the fear from the Red Sea with the fear that the people of Israel, or that the people of Jericho were suffering from the crossing of the Red Sea. And this caused them to close in even more deeply. This is a tragic picture of the parable that Jesus tells of the man who stores up grain in his barns because he believes that will make him safe from any calamity or any disaster or any power from either God or man. And he lays back and he says, soul, this night, kick back, take it easy. This night, you are satisfied. And God comes to him and says, you fool, this night your life will be demanded of you. And so the people of Jericho are in a similar position that they kick back. They must have been kicking back and saying, soul, take it easy. You're fortified. You're closed up. You're closed in. And this reminds us also of another example from the book of, I believe, Jeremiah, where God speaks of a people that were sound and secure in their fortifications, but God was going to use Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the great empire of that day in the region, to smash through all their securities, because he had chosen that to be the time that this people received judgment. And so God is going to say to the people of Jericho, fools, this night your lives will be demanded of you. And then where will all these fortifications be that you've prepared for yourselves, and these stores of food and weapons and whatever else? So, sadly though, we see throughout these first 5 chapters and then this final concluding section of the sort of preliminary section of Joshua that, like the Egyptians, the Amorites here did not repent. In addition to Paul saying that the invisible things are clearly seen by that which is made, so that they are without excuse, God has demonstrated his power through signs, and yet Jesus told his own generation that an unbelieving and adulterous generation demands more and more and more signs, and never has enough evidence to truly believe, because ultimately unbelief is not a matter of evidence, it's a matter of the heart. So, moving on to verse 2 in this sort of mini section of Joshua. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor. And so we see how basically the people of Jericho have, in a way, given themselves over. In that same section of Romans chapter 1, it says 3 separate times, I believe, that God gave them up to their own depravity, to their own foolish decisions and behavior. And this is an illustration of it, because essentially God sealed the people of Jericho in by having them seal themselves in, just like God had previously done with Pharaoh. Pharaoh hardened his heart, God hardened his heart. Pharaoh hardened his heart, God hardened his heart. Meaning God hardened Pharaoh's heart through allowing Pharaoh to harden his own heart. And so God is giving the people of Jericho up to judgment by allowing them to give themselves up, in essence, making themselves perfect targets for the power of God, because it operates in a way that is opposite to the way that these warrior nations were accustomed to dealing with, or these warrior city-states. Notice that it says, I have given them into your hands. Not I will, or I am giving them. I have given them. Now, this is probably partly speaking of the way that God has indeed sealed them in by allowing themselves to seal themselves in. It's speaking of the fear and wonder that Rahab spoke of overtaking the people of Jericho. It speaks of the Israelites' morale being at an all-time high when they gave the two spies gave the encouraging report to Joshua. And it was the opposite of the 10 spies giving the discouraging report to Moses. All these factors are no doubt playing in to the way that God has given these people up and has given the city of Jericho into the hands of Israel. Of course, ultimately, God will conquer the city by a supernatural sign miracle on an epic scale. So some of this is probably God speaking outside of time, saying that to God, it's as if though he had already given them up, even though they were in time, this hasn't occurred yet. Now, we can see another example of what they call the prophetic past tense. We can see many examples of this actually in the prophets, and I'll put up one of them here just to illustrate the point. But generally speaking, that's what it is speaking of, is God's being outside of time, and therefore the judgment, though future, to God is as if though it has already happened. Now, the final point I'll say to wrap these two verses up is that even though God has given, the people still have to take, to go along with this continuing theme and to move us into the next video. Israel had a role in this. God could have just destroyed the entire army of Jericho and killed all the people as he did with Egypt, but he chose not to. He chose to give the Israelites a role in this. Just a brief aside, I have to mention again that this is a perfectly just thing for God to do, both because of the terrible wickedness the people of Jericho as Canaanites were engaged in, but also because in sin, David says, "My mother conceived me." When Adam sinned, all sinned, therefore all that we as sinners deserve is wrath anyways. Just a brief aside. And so that will be all for now. And my encouragement is that if you are in the place where you have essentially sealed yourself up against the wrath of God and think that you have forever, essentially, to make a decision about the gospel, I would remind you that the people of Jericho thought that until the moment the walls fell and it was too late. So, until next time, this is Eric Slawick, the UWM Pen Guy, and this has been the Bible Commentary.